Welcome to The New Normal, a podcast brought to you by Cars.coza and made possible by Absa.
Hi, I'm consumer journalist Wendy Knowler, and this is part 2 of our discussion around the new normal when it comes to cars. So in part 1, we discussed consumers' current COVID-19 appetite for car buying and how the industry is responding to it. And now we're focusing on the how. A lot has had to change when it comes to buying a vehicle. With me, in voice anyway, to discuss how the need to be as physically apart as possible through the process of buying a car, from comparisons to test driving to taking delivery of the car, is Mark Domesser, National Chairperson of NADA, the National Automobile Dealers Association, and Fulu Mandane, Absa's General Manager of Dealer Relationships. Some context first. We devised a little poll hosted by Cars.coza and Absa, asking if your income has been drastically reduced due to COVID-19, which of the following would you be most likely to do? Sell the family's second car, sell or trade in your car for a cheaper model, sell other possessions, or finally cancel or downgrade your insurance policy. We kept it simple, 4 options. Results varied slightly. They was run twice on different platforms, but the top 2 selections related to selling the family's second car or downgrading to a cheaper model, which is perhaps not surprising given how much money is wrapped up in our wheels. A small poll, yes, but it does explain much of the activity in the motor trade right now. But buying or selling a car via a dealership in this time of the coronavirus is a very different experience from what it used to be. Social commentators have said that COVID-19 has accelerated many trends by at least 3 to 5 years, among them working from home, of course, and online shopping. Will the same be true of car retail? Will most consumers be buying their cars totally online, or as totally as possible, 2 or 3 years from now? Or will dealerships continue to dominate the retail landscape, albeit in a heavily modified form? How is shopping and comparing test driving and signing documents, how's all of that happening right now? And how likely is it that the changes will be fairly permanent rather than temporary? So let's start with you, Mark. If you want to kick off by throwing some of those concepts around, what are you guys seeing on the dealership floor?
Hi, Wendy. Thank you for inviting me today. I think it's exactly that, Wendy. I think things are advancing, but we aren't ever really for IC going to end up being like Take-A-Lot. And I think the reality is there's a few reasons for that. The size and fundamental nature of the purchase is such that it's quite complicated from a regulatory point of view and a consumer safety point of view to buy a vehicle totally online. And I think that process has been much advanced now. And generally speaking, most of the process is actually done by not being at the dealership, which is actually quite nice and convenient. So we are seeing that now, that customers and on liaising with salespeople as much online and getting a lot of the pre-shopping and finance type things done before they come to the dealership. And we really do all the regulatory stuff on collection. So sometimes customers are doing test drives at home, which works sometimes, which is also not necessarily always ideal because they can't see.
Please explain, Vlad, how does that going down? They're doing test drives at home. How does that work? You bring the car to them?
Yeah, that how it is. It's not ideal because of the natural environment in South Africa. Also, they can't maybe see the other car. So it's clumsy if they want to test drive a RAV and now suddenly they want to test drive a Land Cruiser or a Hilux or something. So realistically, test driving, if you see the car in its context, you want to touch and feel. It's sometimes better to see these things on the showroom floor. So there is always that element that you can't always get the same experience online as you would in the real showroom. However, dealerships really lend themselves to very, very nice COVID-19 environment because we have really spacious facilities and it's generally appointment only. There's not very many people on the floor at any one point in time. So it is a nice environment for customers there. And that is one nice context to it.
Okay, great. Something that Fulu and I discussed in the lead up to this podcast was, this acceleration to doing things more online is typically going to be received differently by different age groups. Are you, and feel free to jump in here, Fulu, as well, are you noticing any differences between your sort of younger buyer, your first or second car buyer who's going with the flow, and someone who's perhaps buying, the 10th car in their lifetime and just is really not coping with all the changes?
I think, thanks again, Wendy and Mark, for having me here. One thing that we can just take into consideration is that the COVID-19 pandemic has accelerated some pre-existing trends in the market, like the augmented reality and the cloud technologies, and has sort of created a pressure cooker effect where certain things that were taking place in the market in the past, maybe at a bit of a slower pace, is now actually accelerating quite quicker, such as what Mark mentioned earlier, to say most dealers are embracing the online platforms to actually do sales. And we're finding that more and more people are actually also jumping into this, where they can, at this stage, some dealers can actually go through the end-to-end of selling a vehicle, test drive and everything, and only see the customer right at the end. And funny enough is that we do find that people in different generation gaps are actually embracing the process as well, because maybe the concern right now is more around their health. They'll rather not take chance around that.
Interesting, yeah.
But the simple side of things is that you will still find that the consumer's attitude towards the physical structures of the dealers was in the process, obviously, of the change as well. So it also helps. And you might find what we call the digital natives actually will most likely adapt and accelerate the process of online buying experience with much more safer considerations into the process as well. And the fact that Banks has got a platform where you can sign online, the e-contracting platforms where you can do everything online and send everything through, no need for physical application processes, that also helps, right? Because you find that customers feel much more comfortable doing that now, in particular, than ever before. And we will just see whether everybody embraces this fully, or is it just an effect of the situation?
Yeah, I think you're right. I think it's the way that cars now have to be bought is just another part of how we have to live our lives now. So it's not in isolation, and everything else carries on the same. And the way you buy a car is now a little alien. Everything has accelerated to online, and all the same considerations around distancing and sanitizing and all the rest. So I think we would just, you're right, just embrace it as just another thing that is now the new normal. I want to touch on what you said, Fulu, about signing for the deal online. When car sales were finally reopened, I started thinking about this, and I know from my work as a consumer journalist that a lot of people think they have a cooling off period when they buy a car, which they don't, unless the deal is not signed at a dealership, which it always is. So now I was thinking, well, if cars are delivered to people at their homes, which they are now, right? We're not having the whole big giant bow, flowers, whatever, champagne. Well, we're not having champagne at all, sadly, anymore. But with all of that not happening on the dealership floor anymore, does this mean the deal's not being signed actually at the dealership? Does this mean that now consumers have the benefit of a 5-day cooling off period, which they wouldn't have normally? Either of you can answer that. Mark or Fulu, it's both your domain.
Yeah, that is a tough one, Wendy. I think in terms of actual physical delivery, I really don't think it's too difficult to expect a customer rather to fetch the car on the dealer floor if that's the only time of physical contact and they're comfortable with that process. There is obviously that gap. And obviously the cooling off period applies that if you don't sign the deal on the floor and it's a finance deal, then they will have that cooling off period. I know that some of the banks were saying that, well, they were trying to potentially extend what's the difference between, for instance, a finance and insurance manager signing a deal at home versus at the dealership? You're getting, if you think about it logically, I mean, you're getting the same thing. You're getting the advice. You're getting a representative from the bank, etc. But that does pose a bit of a risk to dealers. And I really don't. I would not really want to be signing deals at customers' houses. Test drive, fine, but I think that's quite clumsy, and that's not the right environment. It's not a good place to get financial advice, sort of in a driveway. Really
poor light, maybe.
Yeah, exactly. So any consumer rather go to the dealership floor. It's very safe. You'll have a very big office to sit in, and you can then have dedicated one-on-one time. I don't think that's really practical when you're signing for an 800,000 rand car.
So legally, Okay, but legally, do you not still have to have the car delivered to the home, or legally now, and can they?
Well, there's a difference between delivery and sign-up. Is
Oh,
that
right.
delivery or is that?
I've got you.
Yeah, so if you're signing up a bank contract, but sign it on the floor, delivering at home, that's fine because you've already signed the bank contract on the dealership premises.
Okay, it's just the handover. But Fulu, we were discussing there is a way around this legality of where the deal is signed and not allowing for that cooling off period. Am I right? It's something about where the server firms hosting the sites are able to be registered as the premises in terms of the National Credit Act. And so that does away with the cooling off period in which the customer can change their minds. Am I right?
Yeah, but the process of here, it is still regarded as an on-site transaction for the purposes of the NCA, and no cooling off period will be permitted, obviously. So we treat it exactly the same as the contract being signed
at the dealership. I wanted to just canvass that because a lot of consumers, as you guys in the industry will know, have this notion that they have a cooling off period. If they change their minds about the car, they didn't test drive it, one of my bugbears, and now they don't. It's not what they thought it was. Within 5 days. Let's cancel the deal, and that is absolutely not the case, right? And it's not going to be the case under lockdown restrictions either. I just wanted to make sure we made that absolutely clear. And what about, what is it like for Mark, for those of you in the business, your dealerships? How's the experience changed for your staff and therefore for your buyers as well? That same buzz isn't there. You can't have the same number of people. And how are they adapting to this new normal?
Yeah, that's a very good question. Typically a dealership revolves around people and buzz and energy and walking up and down, customers on the floor and that kind of thing. And I think as we came out of lockdown, dealerships became libraries, really. Quiet place, minimal staff. We sort of try to keep staff on, most from the country are probably on sales staff anyway, on about a 50% work. So they'll come in every other day, or they'll come in on shifts for half the day and then leave and then come in the next half the day. So we have continuity. But things are quiet, or have been very, very quiet. Service businesses also, you don't have a stagger of people in the morning. You try to stagger your appointments. So at any one point in time, there's presence in a dealership that are very quiet. That, however, the volumes are slowly coming back. Last month, for instance, we were about 68%, I think, of the year before sales. I suspect July will probably be about the same. So we roughly, it's about 70% of sales capacity, and that does show. So the environment is exceptionally quiet, but that's also good. But that's also a good thing, Wendy, because if the dealership floors are quiet, it's actually a safer space for customers, and it's more about managing the flow of people in and out of the dealership. We can take walk-ins, but you're never going to, I doubt these days, especially during the week, if you rock up at any dealer in South Africa, that you're going to suddenly be there with a queue of people outside. Which wow, it's not productive for a dealership, but it's safe for customers, and I think that's important.
Buying a car is seldom an impulse buy, given the amount of money involved. So I think, not having that buzz is not really a detriment to a customer. What they want, what we all want now, is to feel safe. And that can certainly be provided. Which brings me to my final question, which I threw it out in the beginning. 2-3 years from now, you've already started talking about, staff rotating. And it's been on the table for a while that, do we need these huge gleaming dealerships? Will COVID have accelerated, do you think, the move towards scaling down dealerships in terms of number and size, etc., and doing things more online? Or because of the servicing element and because of the way cars have always been sold, we will still have very much sales being driven, excuse the pun, out of dealerships?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think that one thing COVID has shown everyone in the motor industry is that we can do more with less, or the same with actually less people. So we're finding that, because we've had limitation in workshop staff and limitation of sales staff, that we are working out that we're probably a little bit underproductive as to where we were, where you previously had 8 staff selling 50 cars or 40 cars, and you can maybe do it with 5. And I think that trend is going to come out now. And because everything's done more online, you want to deal with as few people online through the process as possible. And that will, over time, accelerate. It'd be ideal if you can engage online with one person who can sell you the car, sell you the finance, give you the advice, and then eventually go to the delivery. So I think that is going to dynamically change or bring forward that process. We're thinking 2025 was the death of the salesman. That's a trend that's gone around. I still believe there'll be salespeople, but maybe there'll be more deal makers. So there'll be more empowered sales. They're more like an F&I and a salesperson combined. And I think you'll see those kinds of things. I mean, people more forward will have to. Why would you want to deal online with a salesperson and then online with a finance person? And then that's clumsy. So I think over time, you'll see that process merge into a more slicker process. And yes, we won't need as big as showrooms. I mean, you don't need these big, vast, huge showrooms. Or we don't as dealers. And the manufacturers might still have the product shown. But your dealers are generally borne by the size of your workshop. So, the trend will be smaller showrooms, less showrooms, but workshops will still be there for time to come.
Thank you, Mark. Fulo, any last thoughts from you on where we're going to be 2 years from now?
I think maybe just to add on top of what Marcus just said, Wendy, if you consider, now we spoke about the e-contracting platforms by the financial institutions, so which means customers can make that decisions around signing that specific contract. And if you consider what actually happened now during the COVID-19 lockdown, that we saw an increase in digital identification and verification platforms where customers do not necessarily need to submit their FICA documents. All they can do is just use a different technology platform to actually identify and verify that they are the real person that is applying for the vehicles. So if you just add those technological investment that has gone into the industry, it just shows that there are certain things that cannot remain the same, right, in the market, because there's already so much investment that most of the dealers has gone in terms of the back-end systems, in terms of sales platforms, how they attract customers, marketing platforms. Do they need somebody to physically be calling people anymore, or they can use robots and all those nice things that everybody's been talking about? I think we're moving closer and closer to that environment, because when you visit some of the dealers, you actually see that they've already started embracing those technology and they're already starting to use it. And the guys that started earlier, obviously they're reaping the benefit now. And the guys that haven't started at this stage need to actually really accelerate that process, because things are changing very quickly in the dealer or retail space in South Africa.
As we've seen, all about acceleration. Thank you so much, the two of you, for joining me for this remote conversation. It's been quite enlightening even for me. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Wendy.
Thank you, Wendy.
Thank you for listening to The New Normal, a podcast brought to you by Cars.coza and made possible by Absa.